Again, my name is Liandro Arellano. I'm running for state representative, and I would love to have your support. The election's on March 20th. We get good people who go down initially, but after you're there for a couple decades, you know, yeah, you're chasing the money to try to get elected. You owe everybody favors. You know, you pick sides on all these political battles, and all of a sudden you're a lot more easily influenced. And I'm sure that's not everybody, but it's enough so that out of Chicago we get some that are going in and they're ready for us before they can get down there. And then you add in the ones who get down there too long and kind of either get complacent or corrupt, or start crossing the line a little bit on the ethical decisions. And by the time we're voting on bills, we feel like over half the people don't have our interests at heart. So.
Could be, yeah, no.
Yeah, it's all over the place. So yeah, that's I guess not really the nutshell answer. That's a long version, but that's what got me interested.
You don't have to political anybody in a nutshell because they don't give you a nutshell answer, so that's not unusual.
Right, right.
So that's okay.
Yeah, and that's the kind of policy I'm looking at doing. I'm also a social conservative. I'm very pro-life in some of those issues like that, but the really thing that agitated me to get in the race was economic issues. In terms of, you look at regular taxpayers, small businesses, I think we take an unfair burden. You look at some of the big companies that are getting bailed out. I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're a Republican, why are you this big corporate guy?" And I try to explain to them, just because I'm a small businessman doesn't mean I support what's going on in terms of bank bailouts or in terms of like Sears getting this big tax break. Hello. Because what ends up happening, what ends up happening is the government still needs the same amount of money to run. So essentially we're at a competitive disadvantage. Walmart coming to town and they got a lower property tax rate. Well, any of the retailers in business in Dixon selling the same stuff, they're at a competitive disadvantage because their sales tax rate's higher. And they have to deal with that on top of all the other disadvantages that come with it. So the same token happens, I think, for some of those big businesses. When they get a big tax break, it just means we're paying more money. And you see that come into play when you see the income tax hike that happened in January, where all of us got our taxes raised, small business got our taxes raised, and some of the big corporations ran to the legislature and said, "This is too much, give us a break." So they gave them a break, of all people. So I don't think necessarily when you say you're pro-business, you're pro-corporatist. They try to differentiate between the two of them. I don't necessarily support what they're doing at that level. I'm sympathetic to the fact that they don't want these big companies to leave, but they need to make a more equitable tax system where more and more isn't asked of us as little guys, where they're small employers, regular citizens, while the big guys keep getting breaks, or when they make bad business decisions, they get bailed out, which is what happened more so at the federal level, but you see that a little at the state level too.
I don't think that's quite fair when, I don't know about most people, but I know the owners are we pay our bills, we pay for our home, we never ask for anything, and these people that are bought above their price range, all of a sudden, oh, gee, let us help these guys out. I know better than to buy something I can't afford. And I think most of us know better. And I don't think that's right. I'm sorry. My brother bought a house, 183, I'm from California, and now it was up, and now it's worth less than he paid for it. It's like, sorry, you did it. So I don't know. It seems like the tax is so unfair in this country. They don't raise the taxes, but they raise everything else.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing.
Well, and some of that was the government messing with the economy. They kind of were incentivizing people to go out and get houses by the way they were regulating or deregulating specific to things.
They were letting people get loans who couldn't afford them.
Exactly. And they were artificially creating low interest rates because they were manipulating the economy. The president gets to his end of a term, and it's both parties. Both parties were doing stuff like this. You get to the end of the term, and hello, come in. They want to look good economically, so what do? They depress the interest rate so you can borrow at 3 or 4%. So all these people run out and they're like, "Oh, look at this huge house I can afford." And then when it gets back in the middle of it and they realize they're going to do some bad things in the economy, it goes up, and all of a sudden they can't afford their house, and then they're failing.
And the people that are paying their bills, we have to pay for that.
Absolutely.
And that's not fair.
Absolutely.
No.
The same thing frustrates me with what happened with the welfare reform in Illinois that we try to do. It's one thing to have a social safety net where your kind of most vulnerable citizens are getting caught. It's another thing where the legislature tried to enact some simple checks in terms of means testing, say, all right, you got to make below this amount of money in order to qualify for this kind of welfare. And the federal government stepped in and said, well, what you're doing isn't fair, and they put limits on what they could do. And we come to find out, they had kids from Indiana who were qualifying for the All Kids program in Illinois. They had people who weren't citizens of the U.S. qualifying for the All Kids program in Illinois and some of the other welfare programs. So we have a situation in Illinois where we can't afford to pay our own bills, and yet we're paying for the health care kids in Indiana, the health care kids from not even the same country. You know, I don't mean to be cruel, but we have to look at what our priorities are. We got to decrease our spending somewhere because it's not working. And do the kids who can't afford health care in Indiana deserve to get caught somewhere? Yeah. Should it be Illinois taxpayers catching that? Probably not. And the fact that we can't even set up a basic check to do it is kind of ridiculous. So, you know, I'll go out and talk about welfare reform. I'm not talking about stripping away any kind of safety net, or, you know, they want to talk about how we want no government at all. That's nonsense. But I do think we need some basic reforms that I think are kind of common sense. You know, if you say you're only making $12,000 a year, and they means tax you, and you're making $28,000 a year, we need to be able to know that. And I think that's a pretty simple reform that we should have allowed to go through. And yeah, that does tie into the same thing with the mortgages. We're bailing people out who are making poor decisions, and the government's kind of enabling them with these artificially low interest rates. And then those of us who are doing our jobs right, you know, the businesses that are succeeding are bailing out the businesses that are not. The same principle. So I'm pretty sure I don't run my Jimmy John's right. I can't make my mortgage payments, and the bank comes in. Nobody's going to bail me out, but I'm expected to help bail out, you know, Sears Corporation, some of these other guys that we're giving bailouts to at the state and federal level. That's an issue. And it's an issue of both fairness and it's an issue of practicality, because we're enabling them to keep doing that. Every time we bail out somebody for making wrong choices, we just create a moral hazard that they're going to keep doing that. Whether you're somebody going in to buy a house, or whether you're a CEO trying to get a golden parachute at a company that you run into the ground. I don't think it's the right way to do it. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So again, that's why I differentiate between being pro-business and being pro-corporatist, especially when it comes to balance. It needs to be a fair balance. Any other comments?
About the Iraqi war. I'm all for the war being over, Pete, but are we ending it too soon, perhaps, for votes?
Well, obviously that's a federal issue, so it's a little bit out of my realm of comment. And plus, I'm not active duty, but I'm kind of limited on what I can say because I'm still a reservist.
I see.
I guess my short answer would be, from what I've seen in my couple terms, I think they have a pretty good shot of keeping their country together. When I came back in 2005, my first combat tour was in 2005, and my second one got done in May of 2010. When I got back in 2005, I was convinced we shouldn't have been over there, that there was no hope for them, that they couldn't run their own country. And when I came back in 2010, I was a little more comfortable with where they're at. So I guess your question is specifically, are they far enough along where they can keep it? I don't think we could ever possibly know, honestly, because the real answer is going to be found out when we finish pulling out. They just had in the news that we pulled out of Camp Victory, which for those of you who don't know was our big major base in Iraq. And it's where I was based out of on my second tour. As an engineer, I kind of travel all over, but I was based out of Baghdad and Camp Victory, the BBC complex, on my second tour. And it's completely Iraqi now. And so far, I haven't seen any massive instability.
That's
So,
been a day or two, though.
yeah, that's only been a little while.
Yeah, give a little bit of time.
So I think that's when the real answer is going to come. If they do make it, it's going to become, because we invested in massive amounts of money. I mean, if people could see how much money we put into that country, it's just some of the things I saw. Some of it was good, and some of it was incredibly wasteful. Just like any branch of the government, the Department of Defense can waste their fair share of money. And I'd see truck drivers go out on routes because if they didn't make the run, their contractor wouldn't get paid. So they'd have them going doing stuff they didn't necessarily be doing. As an engineer, there's sometimes my team would be sitting on a bus while a private contractor would be doing some of the engineering. Why? Because they got paid $140,000 and they didn't want to lose that contract, whereas I'm making maybe $40,000 plus a couple of combat pay boosts. And so their company wanted to make sure they get that paid. So I have my frustrations with how they did it. It wasn't the best way to do it. I think they got a shot. I'm not so sure about Afghanistan. I've been over to Afghanistan, so I don't talk about it much about it.
So we do have Illinois Guardsmen there. Do you have, as a representative, would you have influence over where and what they do? I'm not sure.
Very very minimal at the state level. The biggest thing we can do is in terms of how we treat them when they get back. In terms of Illinois policy and law, they get stuff like help with college and help with readjustment, things like that. But in terms of policy as to where they go, even the governor, who's technically the commander, has minimal once they get activated, because they actually get activated on federal orders. As a National Guardsman, there's two ways to get activated. You can get activated by order of the state and the governor, or you can get activated by the federal, which is called Title, I forget what it is, but it's a completely different part of the code, and you leave any control from the state level when the federal government calls for it. So the answer is no, really, you can't do anything about it. It's all up to the commander chief. But if you get called up for, say, flooding the Mississippi River, you get paid differently, your benefits are different, and you follow a different chain of command, and then technically the governor would be the top of that. So it depends which title you call it. So, any other questions? Well, I'll tell you a couple of things that I'm really interested in when I get down to this. A couple of things, like I was just talking before about commissions. One of the first bills I'd like to bring in is commission reform. Just based on my own rough math, nothing fancy and no big staff working for me, I figured out that if we just did some basic things like cut some of the commissions in half in terms of how much they're paid, that'd still leave them over $50,000 a year for most of them. And some of the commissions I think get cut out outright or made non-paying. I mean, that'd be over $10 million. And I was specifically looking for things right around the $10 million price point. Because, as you've heard, Jack Mably Center's been in the news and some of the other things they've been trying to do. And I said, well, where can we save this amount of money? So I just started going through the budget, looking at different things that I thought we could tweak in terms of roughly around $10 million a pop. Workers' compensation is another thing that we need to adjust in the state of Illinois. We have, I believe right now, the second highest payouts in workers' compensation. And while that gets into some technical jargon, the basis of it is, if you get hurt on the job in Illinois, it's really tough for the employer to do nothing. For example, if I'm out playing basketball on a Sunday and I hurt my knee, I can go into work, and legally speaking, there's almost nothing an employer can do to say, that actually didn't happen at work. And they have to cover it, which means they end up doing a bunch of payouts, and they're paying the employee who's coming in and covering you while you're off work. So, second highest in the country, Indiana has been using that as a luring point, chasing businesses over, and it's worked. One of the big businesses that just crossed the line was on the Indiana-Illinois border, and they were essentially a steelworking kind of company. They worked with metals, and they were having a huge problem with workers' compensation because it's a high-risk job, and as such, they're more heavily regulated than most. And they were having a problem with employees basically coming in and say they hurt themselves there and not being able to do anything about it, paying out these really high standards that Illinois sets. It's not discussed between employers, doctors, and insurance companies or anything like that. It's actually set by the state of Illinois. Hey, Dad. So they jumped ship, they crossed the border just a little bit, and they're in Indiana now. And that was 100 and some jobs that are relatively well paying that aren't there anymore. And the number one thing they were talking about was workers' comp. So that goes into something a little more technical. If you're not an employer, you maybe not care as much, except for the fact that it affects the economy. So workers' comp, something we need to address. Pension reform is probably one of the biggest things I talk about. And it's a dangerous topic because the first thing people want to know, especially if they've ever been a public employee, is what are you going to do for the people who have already built up a pension and spent their lives, however many decades, planning on a certain amount of money and retiring based on that. Because if you're, for example, a teacher, you don't get to pull out Social Security. You're not legally allowed to, and your pension is pretty much your retirement plus whatever you maybe invested personally. So it is a sensitive subject, and I try to approach it carefully. But we're also having an issue where it's being abused a lot. If you've been following the news at all, you've seen some of the stories out of Chicago where people will work literally one day, go become a union boss and qualify for a full state pension. So essentially they're not a public employee at all, and they're qualified for a public pension, which is ridiculous. And yes, they have to pay a little bit to catch up, but I mean, if they end up paying however many hundreds of thousands and over the course of their retirement they pull up $2 million, that's a pretty good deal for them, and not quite as good a deal for the taxpayers. Another problem we've been seeing is that the way pension is calculated, the last 4 years, or the best 4 years out of your last 10, are what set your pension rate. And what we'll see is people will get connected, which after you've been on a public job for 30, 40 years, you generally are, all of a sudden for the last 4 years, their pay spikes dramatically. And voila, they were making $50,000 $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year, and all of a sudden they're making $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 in the last few years, and their pension's based purely off of that high end of the scale. It's not over the course of the career as some people think it is. And who's on the hook for that again? It's the taxpayers. So one thing to remember as you hear all these politicians talk about it, whether I win or not, it's going to be an issue, is our longest structural debt we have in the state of Illinois is the pension system. It's somewhere around $100 billion in unfunded liabilities, and it's really destroying our ability to budget in the future more and more so. Because what they did is they kept skipping payments because they didn't have the money and payments were too high, and they kept passing bills saying, well, we're going to pay even more in the future. Okay, well, we're going to push it back, but we're going to pay even more in the future. So they got the payment, instead of like a steady amount, to catch up. It's a ramp. So every year we go forward, it goes higher and higher, almost exponentially. And next year, they're already scrambling to figure out how they're going to pay for it. They were scrambling this year, and in about 3 years, more than doubling what we were expected to pay this year, while we're still continuing to pay for all the regular pension system. So it's basically impossible under the current economy to come in anywhere close to touching or taking care of our pension system. If the economy gets better, like we keep promising, we're still not going to be able to do it. We're going to be able to push back insolvency a little bit longer. But $100 billion is massive, and that's not even counting the roughly between $6 to $8 billion in debts that we're not paying right now. And that portion is just Illinois saying, I'm not going to pay this bill. That's it. If I get my produce shipment at Jimmy John's and they came in, I said, I can't pay, I'll pay in 2-3 months. That's essentially what Illinois is doing with a lot of people doing business with them. I've done business with the state of Illinois twice. Once was on February 2nd, which is actually my birthday, when the Illinois Guard got called up for the big snowstorm. It took them over 3 months to give me my check. Over 3 months. And I'm one of the luckier ones because it's a small bill. If you do healthcare service with the state of Illinois, if you're, heaven forbid, a county board or a city, I think Lee County, I was talking to their treasurer, they were somewhere around 8 months behind in payment. So try to budget when people owe you money, wait 8 months to pay you. It's really hard. So if you want a stimulus, one of the things Illinois can do is just pay its bills that it's already promised to pay. And all that money would go flood into the system. How ridiculous is that? As opposed to some of the fancy things they're trying to do, like with the tollway. We were about $13 billion in debt. All of a sudden, we're having a $12 billion tollway project. That's not all the roads in Illinois. That's just this one tollway. And none of it's in this area. It's all by Chicago and the suburbs. So
I use I-90. It's $1. And it's going to be $1.90 on January 1st.
Yeah.
That's darn near double.
We've heard enough. The cookies were great.
Please. So, I mean, it's not a little bit, it's a lot.
Yeah,
Because with the
double.
government, everything is not a little bit, it's a lot.
And one of the reasons they did that, and I actually went, they did a roving kind of commission where they heard input, which is a fancy way of saying, we're going to let you yell at us before we're going to do it anyway. But in Dixon, I went to their one, and they were talking about how, well, it's going to create this many jobs, and it's going to ease up this amount of traffic, and we really need repairs. They made this good-sounding spiel about why they needed all this repair work. And one of the things I went up and said to them is like, look, I'm a small business owner. I've built a business up. We had to do all their mod and all that stuff. You can't come and tell me what cost to maintain is nearly as much as the startup cost. One of the reasons they had the tolls so high in the beginning is because they had all these initial costs. And now they're trying to tell us they need to nearly double them, despite the fact that all that infrastructure is already there. This is not a repair project. It's not a maintenance project. They're trying to do, hello. They're trying to do a whole bunch of new projects, and they got a lot of big construction unions to give them some support, because those guys get the money. And it's another situation where they're picking and choosing which people and which industries win. The truckers, for example, trucking industry is taking a hit. That's a lot of money for tolls. Whereas, the construction unions get a great deal. They're going to get these fat prevailing wage. I don't know if you guys know how prevailing wage law works in Illinois, but any public works project has to pay this government rate. They can't bid out. They can't try to get the lowest price possible. They have to pay this government mandated wage. So these guys are getting some nice money that we're going to be paying as we run back and forth in the tollway. And it's really coming at a bad time because Illinois doesn't have any money. The economy's poor. People are already struggling. And they're going to say, well, these people are going to get this big chunk of money and everybody else is going to pay for it. pretty much the opposite of what we needed. If we had $12 billion to spare to dump into the tollways, maybe we should have caught up on our bills and not done so much damage in terms of property tax increases and tax increases so employers can start hiring again. But that's, you got to be connected, and they're connected, so they get that big one.
Probably should be running for government.
Yeah, I think that's a little more than I want to chew right now. But I
It's a
think,
good idea, though, run for government.
hopefully we'll have some
You
good
gotta
ones.
start small.
Yeah. I didn't get to follow the last Republican primary, or the primary season. I was actually in Iraq during that, but I've talked to a couple of the candidates that ran for governor last time, and I think, they had some good ideas. It's tough because all the media is based out of Chicago, and you're trying to get state coverage, and it's going to be what's going to be. They're going to, whatever they like is who's going to get the most coverage.
Okay.
So, I think the biggest problem with the governor's race was, there are a couple big problems, but one of the things we saw was right at the end, when Quinn was sensing that he might lose and the polls kept staying low, all of a sudden he made this deal with the unions. And I'm not necessarily anti-union per se, but he made this nice little deal right at the end where he guaranteed them, you're not going to get any pay cuts, we're not going to fire anybody. I don't know if you guys remember when this happened. And all of a sudden, boom, he had troops on the ground, they gave him a bunch of money, he got some extra ads, and then what did he do when he get in office? He turned around and stripped some of their raises and all this other stuff. You know why? Because he knew they didn't have the money. The same things that some of the Republicans are saying, which is we don't have the money to give public servants all these raises right now. Everybody's making sacrifices. You're going to have to make some sacrifices too. He knew that. He made the deal anyway. He got elected, and then once he was in office, he cut the benefits to the unions just like pretty much anybody else would have had to, because math doesn't lie. You can only fight math for so long, and the money wasn't there. You can't pay money you don't have, which is why we're $6 billion behind in debts to bills we already agreed to. So I think that was one of the things that killed the governor's race. And it's sad that we can't have an honest conversation about where the money's at because people just want to get elected. And that's what happens.
To deal
Mm-hmm.
with school teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I had a person tell me who was a school teacher that she was going to be retiring in a year or so, and she was telling me how they jacked up her wage,
Mm-hmm.
so she could get a much bigger pension.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot.
I know, but I heard it firsthand, and she wasn't embarrassed to tell me.
No. No, I had, and I've gotten the flip side too. I was down campaigning in Mendota. They have a state fire every month at their VFW down there. And I was down there campaigning, talking to people, and I was talking to somebody on the county board there. And he's actually a Democrat, and we were just chatting. He was a retired school principal, and one of the things he told me was a complaint about exactly that sort of thing. He's like, look, my pension's great. He said, don't worry about my pension. Honestly, I think my pension should be taxed. I think all the pensions should be taxed. But because we're getting all this money, we have these great benefits, and they're acting like they're these victims. He said, come after me. He said, my pension's great. If you take a little bit out of it, it's still going to be great. Is that every public servant? Probably not. They're not all going to be retiring on what a principal does. And one thing I try to differentiate when I'm looking at this is each area is a little bit different. For example, the Chicago Teachers Union, man, they go after the money. They have one of the shortest school days in the state. You look at some of our local school teachers, and one of the big teachers groups here has given up raises 3 years in a row. So I try never to cast everybody with the same stone. There's some people around here who understand we're struggling, and everybody's going to have to sacrifice a little bit. As a small employer, it means instead of working a 55-hour work week for a while, I was working a 70-hour work week. So I don't want to fail. All my employees, that's one of the sacrifices I have to make. The teachers understood that they're going to have to get rid of raises for a few years in a row, and they did it. Some of the people out of Chicago just don't seem to get the memo. And we kind of carry the slack from them sometimes. So, but I do try to differentiate. I know different people are coming to the bargaining table with good faith, and other people aren't. So I try, you get some people come out and, I hate the unions. Private unions I don't have a big problem with. There's a natural, I guess, contest there where the management's trying to get a good deal for them, and the workers are trying to get a good deal for them. Public unions is where I sometimes struggle, because one of their tactics, instead of negotiating, they're going to go out to the guy who's not giving them the deal they want with, kicked out of office, give a bunch of money to somebody supports them, and then they're essentially negotiating with themselves with other people's money, which is the taxpayers. And that's where I started to have a problem with it. Is that every public union? No. Like I said, the teachers around here have done a couple good faith efforts. But some of the other unions I've seen, like the Ask Me deal that they did with Governor Quinn that I was just messing around, that's exactly what I'm talking about, you know. Everybody's talking about how we're going to have to take this cut, so let's cut this deal with Quinn, give him a bunch of money, get him elected, and we don't have to worry about negotiations. Here, nobody loses their job, nobody does anything. And the sad thing about that is if Quinn had lost, he was tying any future governor to his deals. Now, think about that for a moment. He's negotiating contracts that if he wins, great, he doesn't have to worry about it. If he loses, he's stuck to all the problems on whoever win that election. You know, so he's giving away not only our current taxpayers, us as taxpayers, ability to deal with the problem, but he's tying the hands of whoever comes after him can't clean up the problem. And that's really irresponsible. So that's where I start to fight with the unions a little bit. If they're not willing to take their share of the sacrifice, people around here are losing jobs, people around here are cutting back on hours. It's got to go around. I think everybody should take their share. Again, a little long.
I got a question for you, Lee.
Sure.
You had mentioned you'd been campaigning around the district. You've got a nuclear power plant, you got the rail hub in Rochelle, you got manufacturing plants, distribution centers, you've got 2 interstates. How do you help make the entire economy of the whole district grow? Because this district is full of dozens and dozens of really small towns.
Well, one of the things I was talking about a little bit earlier is we need a more fair tax policy. Instead of doing, as I was mentioning, this tax increase that we just had at the beginning of the year, where small businessmen, regular citizens are paying a bunch more, and big companies like Sears and some of the other groups kind of get bailed out and say, hey, this is too much, and they go get money from the legislator. We need a more even playing field, and I think that will really spread the economic impact in a much wider radius, not just across the whole district, but across the whole state. Because instead what happens is whoever has enough clout or money to invest and buy a good deal for themselves, that particular area is going to do well. Hoffman Estates obviously doesn't want Sears to leave, and if they say that's great for Hoffman Estates, but it's the rest of the state and people across the 90th district that have to pay the rest of that tax burden. So one of the fast answers is better tax policy and a more even tax policy so everybody's paying a fair share instead of people picking and choosing who's gonna do well and the government saying this certain sector of industry we're gonna cut deals with. So I think that would be a fast answer. Education ties into it too. The way the education system is funded is rich areas are going to get good schools, which means they're going to get good people coming out of them. Poor areas are going to get poorer schools because the property tax is going to be lower from there. And it just kind of insulates them away from having successful people and smart people graduating out of their high schools because they're getting their hands tied behind their back by a failing education system. Chicago has a horrible problem with that, but you even see it on a local level. Areas that already have more money are going to get better schools, and other kids are going to get left behind a little bit more. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, personally speaking on that regard, I can see the difference. I went to high school, I'm a graduate 2001 of Byron High School.
Mm-hmm.
I now live in Ashton. I've met kids who have graduated from Ashton. There's a big difference between the education we received.
And it's not because kids are smarter or dumber in one section of the world than another. It's because the education system is different. They're getting different educations, and some people are getting opportunities that other kids are not. And by no means is education my background or specialty. My background and specialty is in small business management, economic impact and business climate. But I do recognize that there's some problems we have in our education system, especially with how it's funded and which kids are getting a shot and which kids aren't. And that's something I'll have to address and research. I can't come here and tell you I know all the answers because that would be a lie, but I do at least recognize a problem when I see it. So that is something that needs to get addressed at some point too. And I think that would help spread out economic impacts a little bit more as well.
Who will be your opponents?
My opponents, well, there was going to be 5, and now it looks like there's 4. Jeff Metzger was a county board member in DeKalb County, and he was going to be running for the office, but there were some medical issues in the family, so he is just going to run for re-election county board. The mayor of Rochelle filed already. That's Chet Olson, so he's going to be in the race. Tom Demmer, the young guy on the Lee County board, is going to be running. Dan Sidmore, who I don't know very well. He's from the DeKalb area. I think he was a political aide to some congressmen, and now he's going to be running for the office as well. That's on the Republican side for the primary for March 20th. With the Democrats, we haven't seen a candidate come forward, so I don't know if they're going to try to slate one or how exactly that's going to work. I don't necessarily like that system because they don't have to do what I'm doing now, which is come out and have people meet them and talk to everybody. They kind of get hand chosen. But that's the way the law is written. So if I don't know if there'll be a Democrat on the ticket yet or not. So as of right now, unless more file on Monday, there's going to be 4 of us running for the Republican nomination, and none so far on the other side. So we'll see. And like I was telling them a little bit earlier, one of the reasons I got me interested in running for the race is what I'd seen as a small employer and business climate issues and unemployment issues, and there's nobody really with my background running. There's, like I said, a couple people who are politicians right now, and if you want anybody besides that, there's pretty much me. So not only does that set me apart, but I think it at the very minimum in the race, it's going to keep some of these issues that I'm talking about right now at the forefront. They're going to have to address what they think about it, because I'm going to be talking about it. So I'm more of a policy guy. I think that's what changes the direction of our state, not these big kind of thoughts that people are like, we need to balance the budget. Well, that's great. Where? We need to, turn around unemployment and get people hired. That's great. Where? What are you going to do about workers' compensation? What are you going to do about property tax reform? What are you going to do about equalizing the tax burden? They're going to have to talk about that stuff because I'm going to be there. And then hopefully if I win, I'll be able to take that same concept down to Springfield, where I'm actually talking to people, hearing your thoughts, taking it down to Springfield combined with my experiences and making them talk about it down there. I'm not necessarily going to be a party line vote. I'm going to be supporting whatever I think is what we need to do. So, like I said, I'm a Republican. I've been a Republican my whole life, but at the state level especially, Republicans have made their share of mistakes as well. Both parties, what do we got? 4 of the past 8 governors in jail, both parties. It can be anybody. It can be anybody.
They could save money by letting them room together.
Right. Exactly. So I think you really have to look at individual candidates and where they're coming from, and less so party, especially in Illinois, where you can really get.
I got a question about unemployment.
Sure.
It's dropped for like 8.6, which is mainly holiday, whatever, people that aren't looking for jobs.
Right.
I know people the last year or so that they're not looking for a job, they don't want a job, and they're getting unemployment just given to them.
Yep.
They don't even keep signing up.
Yep.
What is wrong with this picture?
You want to know something, and you will not enjoy hearing this, but as an employer, again, I kind of draw from my personal experiences, and one of the things that shocked me the first couple of times I'd seen it is I would get people coming with applications, and then you'd have to sign it off an employer that they turn in an application, right? And it's either because the court ordered them to do something, or they're trying to, meet their welfare promise, or whatever. And the first couple times I got applications in with like no contact information, no phone numbers, I just thought it was a mistake. And then I got some people who actually turned in applications, and for position wanted, they wrote none. They literally wrote none for position wanted. And that kind of blew my mind, because even if you're trying to milk the system, would you really be that blatant? And I didn't look at it until after I'd signed the little slip, but from then on forward, I've always looked at the application before I sign it. So I'm not going to sign for somebody if they put position wanted none. Because exactly for the reason you were saying, there are people who believe that they would rather make $250 a week, $350 a week, and not have to do anything to earn it, than go out and have to work hard but get $400 and $450 a week. And the problem with that is just because you're only making, hello,
How you doing?
$400 a week right now, that's the beginning of your career. You move up. In my case, I started out as a newspaper boy, doing lawns right around here in Grand Detour when I was growing up at age 12. I started washing dishes at age 15 at what was then the White House was my first job, and they're not even open anymore. So, and then my next restaurant job was the White House, or the Dixon Pancake House, which is now Galena Steakhouse, and they're also not open anymore. So hopefully that has nothing to do with me.
I
But,
would say that's good for you.
but yeah, I got my start on the low end and doing these jobs that some of these guys don't want to do, these kind of minimum wage jobs, washing dishes, frying chicken, stuff like that, but it also got me on the path to where I am today. Eventually I became, a little bit above minimum wage employee, and then I became a shift coordinator, an assistant manager, I eventually became a store manager, and now I own my own restaurant. And that started from minimum wage jobs.
But most young people aren't willing to do that.
Well, exactly.
Most of us here
Exactly.
have started that way.
And
I've done some
unemployment,
jobs I
yes,
didn't want to do, but I
absolutely.
had to do.
And unemployment does need to get tweaked in terms of, right now, both welfare and unemployment are almost geared towards getting you to stay dependent on it and stay dependent on the government instead of motivating you to get off, go out and do some work. Like I said earlier, I'm not against having a social safety net. There needs to be some protections there so people aren't, 70 years old, have no money, no retirement, starting to have health issues, and nobody is helping them. That's an issue. But at the same time, we shouldn't have our system so geared towards trapping people into dependency and welfare dependency that they end up at that point simply because they weren't working through their life like they should have been. That's an issue. And that's an issue in terms of how we draw up the system to work. Like I said, if you're getting paid 250 to 300 weeks to do nothing, and minimum wage is going to give you just barely more than that, why would you? What is your incentive for 50 extra bucks a week or 100 bucks extra a week? These people aren't thinking long term. They're not thinking I need to start a career so down the road I'm making 800 a week, 750 a week, 1,000 a week. They're thinking I'm going to go work my butt off, not see my kids, and I'm going to get 100 bucks more a week and do it.
The government's in the room.
Yes, absolutely. And the problem is 10 years down the road when they get a little started and smart to regret it, they're already in a welfare trap and they've already learned how to milk the system. They're getting the free health care. They're getting continued unemployment, other welfare benefits, free food. Right, exactly.
My husband works for Lee County State. He's a financial compliance officer. And he said he's absolutely shocked at the 20-something that are in there waiting for permanent disabilities so they can pay whatever. And he asked one guy, said, why didn't you get a check? I said, why do I want that? I get a check, I can stay home and play video games. How sad is that?
And it just makes it harder for the rest of us who are actually doing our part to get ahead because our taxes are going to that kind of thing. You look at Illinois' budget, like I was just talking about, and the huge chunk of it is towards things like social services, welfare, health care. That's a huge, you think of government, what is government supposed to do? Make sure you have a roadway system, keep law and order, some of this basic stuff. That's not where most of the money in the Illinois budget goes. Most of the money in the Illinois budget goes to the things we were just talking about. Yes, we should have safety net. No, it shouldn't take up this huge majority of our budget. If it is, we're doing something wrong. We're doing something wrong in how we're raising people if the majority of government goes towards, helping out people. Jack Mabee Center, like I talked about, I defended that a little bit. That's one thing, where these are literally people who cannot function in society. Somebody needs to be helping them out. Whether, you see Catholic Charities coming to do work, churches coming to work, that's great. The government can help out, that's great. But some of these people who can work and come into my store and put position wanted none, we got to draw the line well before they get to that point. That's ridiculous. So, yeah, that's not what I'm
That is good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions?
Do you have any thoughts on combining some of these state bureaucracies?
Absolutely.
They seem to have more than the state of California.
Illinois has more levels of government, more taxing bodies than any state in the union.
That's right.
Which is a weird little fact, and it's hard sometimes to put that into terms like, well, is this just somebody that's taxing like $100 a year and it's nothing, it adds up to about the same? No, we have legitimately more levels of bureaucracy. Everything from mosquito abatement districts, which I don't even know what they really are. I'm pretty sure they don't work because I still get bit every year. But they have authority to tax, and they pull some of the taxes that we pay out into some of these districts. Townships are another thing that have been abused. We have a lot of good townships that do a lot of good things, and then we got other ones that just end up becoming corrupt systems for people to mooch off. And I don't know enough about townships to launch into that. I was talking with John earlier the other week about some of the good sides of it, and there's some bad sides too, but when you get down to Springfield is where it really starts to get messy, because there, you look at your township supervisor, they're making what? Not too much. Some of the bureaucrats down in Springfield are making lots and lots of money to be another layer that you're just shuffling paperwork through. And that's why I kind of started the discussion, well, what would my first bill be? Somebody asked me at a recent forum, commission reform. One of the first things I would do, because that's another one of those layers of bureaucracy, where they're just approving things and giving advice, and they're getting paid $100,000 a year, plus the payroll taxes, so essentially it costs us like $120,000 a year to sit on a board that meets maybe some of them a little more than a county board does, except that they're getting paid considerably more than our county board members. There's no reason to be spending that much money on it. We could easily cut a lot of those boards pay in half, and they would still make more than the average person in Illinois. I mean, think about that for a moment. They're doing however many hours a month to give advisory roles, to issue some policy positions, and they're making more than twice what the average person in Illinois does, who's probably working a lot harder than them. So, no, that's something that needs to be addressed. That's another one of those issues, since I don't come from the government, I am not a politician. I can't sit here and tell you, well, I would cut this bureaucracy and this bureaucracy and this bureaucracy. My expertise comes in business management. But it is something that once I get in there and I'm looking, I'm going to be looking at real hard. Because I know it's there, I've seen some of the evidence of it, trying to deal with it as an employer, and I would love to get in and cut some of that out. Because really it ends up taking some of our economic liberty away, because we got to pay to fund all of that. And money is power, so the more of our taxes, that's money leaving us as individuals and local citizens and going to bureaucrats or centralized government, which is something as a conservative I fiercely oppose. I think most authority and spending authority should come from us, how we want to spend our money, and the government is there to provide some basic services and provide a basic safety net, which is not what it is in Illinois at all, and not what it is in most states. But Illinois is a little worse than most, which is why we're also quite more in debt than most. Us in California keep trading spots for who's most in debt and who's in the worst funded position. So
California gives some IOUs.
yeah.
You talked about not getting paid, because I'm from California, most of my families are.
I remember when that happened,
So
yeah.
I hear a lot of that. I mean, if you're getting an IOU, that's pretty bad.
That's embarrassing. And I honestly feel it's kind of immoral, because you're making all these contracts, doing these deals, and then you're just not paying people. And you got politicians going into office, making contracts and deals and promising, whatever to get in office. I'm going to bring this to my community and this to my community, and we're going to give everybody this kind of health care, knowing that they can't afford it, and then they make the promises, the state goes bankrupt, and we're stuck with the bills. We still have a failing, education system struggling, healthcare system struggling. So where did all that money go toward? Well, under Blagojevich, some of it went to his buddies in re-election, but you don't know where the rest of it went. Under some of these guys, you give them a $50,000 donation, and you're building a $5 million road somewhere that we may or may not need. That's not the right way to do it. And that ties into the ethics issues. The ethics issues is something I will be a firebrand on down there, because that stuff really, really bothers me. Blagojevich, worse than most, but a lot of it I think is just because he got caught a little more than most, because he started upsetting the people in his own party. You should have open bid contracts. You shouldn't be able to get a fat donation to your campaign re-election account and then go off and get this nice little contract. That's not the way government should work. And it's the way it's been working in Illinois for far too long. Not just in Chicago, but that influence has bled out into Springfield, because they control Springfield now. All our leaders are from Chicago. They're all lawyers. So they have no economic understanding. They've never run a business, barely worked a job. You got Cullerton, he's a lawyer, he's from Chicago. You got Madigan, a lawyer from Chicago. And by the way, how does he get away with all the blame in Illinois? There's nobody in the state of Illinois who's been in power longer than Madigan, had more control than Madigan, not even the governors. He has more control than governors. And somehow, whenever the news talks about the state of Illinois, then Madigan gets a pass. And they just talk about him like he's this great, powerful person. Where's the culpability? You look at what happened at the federal level, and people were raising against Pelosi, raising against Bush, raising against, Obama now, rightfully so, because they're in charge. Where's Madigan's blame? He's been there forever. He's been there for decades, held more power than anybody else. There should be a good amount of responsibility laid at his feet for what's happening with the state of Illinois is in.
All he needs is one of his buddies to turn him into feds. And that's what it's going to take. Hey, do you think you can get along with Lee Daniels?
Lee Daniels? Is he still down there now?
He is.
Tom Cross is the minority leader now.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. Tom Cross is the minority leader now. I have met him a couple times. My guess
Did you guys get along?
My guess, based on our meeting, is I'm probably a little more independent in terms of I'm trying to represent the people, and I think anybody in leadership in either party is more focused on the party's next steps and what's best for the party. And I think for the most part, I will get along with that. I think there's going to be a few parts where we're having to get in some fights where I think they're trying to help out the Republican Party and it crossways with what the taxpayers might want.
Well, if these guys don't want to budge, you need to take a detective agency down with you.
Yeah.
You can get enough dirt on these people that you can basically just coerce them.
When Brady was running, that's what I was hoping he did if he went. Go in there with a whole bunch of detectives.
Meanwhile,
Allow any law enforcement agent to come and look at anything and see how many people you catch from them. But of course, he did not win, so the chances of that happening to Quinn are minimal. Honestly, to get a little more to the weird things that nobody really cares about but affects everybody, why do we have our primary all the way up in February last time and March this time? There's a lot of places having their primary closer to summer, and that still gives you plenty of time, a half a year, to campaign for the general election before the November.
that is done intentionally.
What's that?
That's done
Oh,
intentionally.
I know, but I think it's silly. I don't think it's much common sense in it because
Well, you get your hardcore voters that'll come out in any type of weather.
yeah,
And if there's even if there's a hot button issue,
Yeah.
Unless you try to murder the Pope, people are not going to come out and
Right.
freezing cold.
yeah. I don't necessarily like when they do the primaries. I think it kind of, like you said, cuts a lot of people off from
Yeah.
having a say. And then when the February one, you saw people aren't even back from like winter who are leaving, and they're essentially they have to go through the rigmarole of trying to get a absentee ballot and all this other stuff where they get disenfranchised. Because that one was February, right around my birthday. My birthday February 2nd. I think it might have been on my birthday.
You
And
told
people
us
aren't
that
back.
twice, it's what you want the present?
Yeah. No presents, please. We're not big presents. Things keep happening on my birthday. I don't know why. Big snowstorms, National Guard thing called out, elections. But yeah, that's too early. Primary is too early. And now we're coming up to Christmas, and we kind of almost have to be out there. You don't like to go stuff like this too close to Christmas, so I'll probably stop campaigning here in a little bit. But it'd be nice if we didn't even have to start until after that whatsoever. But it is what it is. I deal with the lay of the land as the legislature gives it to me right now, and hopefully when I get down there I can start changing some. Yeah.
Like I said, my husband works in Lee County, and he got a calendar for,
Dixon, invite anybody you think might like to come out and meet.
he got a calendar for next year already from the court.
Mhm.
And April 6th was called Spring Holiday.
Mhm.
And I said, there's no spring holiday, we have Good Friday. We looked at another calendar, Good Friday. They went in there and they asked the guy, and he said it came right out of the Illinois Supreme Court. Now we call it Good Friday, Spring Holiday.
Yep.
And it's like,
They're having the same battle with like Christmas trees.
oh, I know that.
Mayor Emanuel in Chicago said it's a holiday tree.
If we have a holiday
Oh,
too,
for
let's tell them on July 4th, we can have one there too.
Yeah.
But,
Holiday tree.
So
Yeah.
Good Friday has become
Spring holiday. Spring holiday, that's just enough.
Yeah, and there were colleges that were calling Thanksgiving the fall break. Okay.
Kick out of the country, you'll go pretty soon.
That stuff I find just silly. It's all semantics. People are arguing about. That too. And it's part of trying to manually adjust the culture. They're really trying to change the
I think
culture and want people,
very
intentionally.
clearly intentionally.
Mhm.
Sure.
They're trying to drive God out of everything.
Mhm. And one of the things
Religious holidays are.
I'd like to see, like I said, I've talked about a lot of economic issues, but there are things, social issues that come into play in the state of Illinois. Like I said, I'm very strongly pro-life. Had a couple bills in the recent legislature that failed that I would strongly support, but there are things we can do to try to push that back. And one of the things that's encouraged me is more and more young people and all across the spectrum in America are becoming more pro-life. Part of it's probably because, the science is getting more and more absolute in terms of genetic code, DNA code, DNA evidence. It's a separate human living being. And people are kind of having to come to terms with that because that's the science of the matter. You can say there might be special situations, stuff like that. You can have all those arguments, but you're running out of ability to argue that it's not a human life. And that's a separate, unique human life. You used to have the argument, oh, it's part of the mother's body or this or that. Its own genetic code, own unique human DNA. If you were going to prison because your DNA hit you up in the court of law and you got caught, it's because the DNA proved it. It's the same thing with an unborn human being. They have their own unique DNA. You can't argue with it.
Well, and also the issues of, just common sense issues like parental notification
Mhm.
or informed consent.
That's just been in the news.
For heaven's
Parental
sakes,
notification.
what
Yeah.
medical procedure can you have without being informed,
Right.
having the consent? Think about it.
Can't get your ear pierced. Isn't that the thing?
Make it, have
Kevin's argument, you can't get your ear pierced.
informed consent decision. And this one, they want you
Yep.
in and out so fast that you don't have time to even think about it.
And that ties back, I mentioned there were a couple bills that I would support. That would
doctors?
Yeah, they got
abortion
closed
clinics?
down.
Bill?
They had a bill up, Representative Sanger, Darlene Sanger, she's from down 88 a little ways, introduced a bill that would require any abortuary, health clinic, whatever you want to call them, to meet hospital standards. And this to me is common sense, whether you're pro-life or anything else, because you're doing an invasive procedure that women have died undergoing, and you're not even meeting basic hospital standards, basic, health standards. And they got it written in there. Why? Well, as I did my research, I come to find out abortion's a big money-making industry for them. They have their own lobbyists. And they're not even talking about any moral issues, it's they want the money from it. So they got lower standards for what it takes to do an abortion. And that kind of turns my stomach. That's one of those areas where, like I said, I'm going as a kind of economic impact candidate, and that's my background. But I will definitely be fighting for bills like that. Not only is that common sense, I think there's moral imperative to do that.
Well, they have broke, in Rockford, honestly, they were using the same equipment over and over. They went autocut, they weren't
Yep.
sterilizing it in
It's
between.
ridiculous.
I cannot believe women haven't just died right and left.
Isn't that the reason that we heard, how many years ago the abortion came in?
Because of back alley
Yeah,
abortions.
right. And it's just being done again.
Mhm.
I think actually back alley abortions were probably safer because it was done by doctors then too.
Mhm.
But because it was against the law, they had to be very careful and very safe to make sure that it didn't hit the news that nobody died. Whereas now, with it being legal, and when they have an emergency, they call somebody in and they never would ever treat a woman. They just send them off anonymously and let their mother watch them bleed to death at home,
Yeah, there's some horror stories that have come out of that. They had a couple, I want to say Ohio or Indiana, just ridiculous stories. Like mothers actually dying on the table and getting covered up. They walked into one health clinic. I love these names. And they actually kept, and it seems like something out of a movie, they had the aborted babies in jars that they were storing because they for whatever reason, they have to meet certain bio removal requirements, and they were having problems getting stuff out, so they just stored them in jars right in there. And if you were walking around, coming in there for abortion, you walk in my rooms, you just see them. How ridiculous is that?
Well, in California, they just threw them in the dumpsters.
Yeah,
And
they've had
somebody found dumpsters just.
they've had some problems with that in Illinois too. And I don't like to make it sound like that's everyone out there doing it, just in the honest of pure truth, but the fact that we can't get a bill across the line that says, hey, you have to meet hospital standards, just basic hospital medical standards, is ridiculous. So yeah, those are the kind of bills that I absolutely support. Parental notification, it's a law in the books in Illinois, it has been for like a decade, but the courts had it tied up. And it's finally supposed to be addressed by the Supreme Court, so depending on what happens there, legislators might have to get to work again on it. So that's another common sense issue. Minors, you treat them like minors in everything. Legally speaking, they need their parental guidance in order to be able to do anything to advise them. And you hear this major life-changing decision, you don't have to tell them. You have these people who have money invested in trying to get them into the clinic are allowed to advise them, but their parents are not. That's ridiculous. The ultrasound bill is another one I very much support. I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but there was a bill, and this also got defeated in the last cycle, that would require any place that offered abortions not to force them into seeing an ultrasound, but to give a mother the option. Say, would you like to see an ultrasound? And bear in mind, this is something that any other pregnant woman gets the option to do. But they don't give it to them because they know a large percent of them, if they see an ultrasound, and they see that baby in there, will not go through with the abortion. Bear in mind, they have a financial incentive not to do it. So all this bill would have done is that they're required, like any other real hospital, to give them the option of seeing an ultrasound. And they have pretty much studies have proven that there are a lot less who will go through.
First of all, they have to pay cash.
Yeah.
They don't have to, the doctors pay no tax on it.
Yeah, it's an all cash
It's
industry.
all cash under the table.
That's amazing.
It's big bucks. So they don't have any of the
Yeah.
same
Because
regulations.
insurance won't come. It's an all cash industry. People
And
don't know how
women don't
lucrative that is.
women don't sue because they're in denial because it's so traumatic to them that they're not going to go through everything. But I think this, along with a lot of the other issues we've talked about, it's moral decay in our country. Whether it's somebody that just doesn't want to earn an honest day's pay, that's a moral issue.
Yeah,
I mean,
it
these
is.
are all moral issues. We've just declined greatly as a nation.
Yeah. And one of the things I try to tell people, honestly, is that as a legislator, at a state level, any level, there's only so much you can do. Some of it comes to upbringing. You know, some of it falls on parents and communities and churches. You know, I can't go out and promise, you know, I'm going to single-handedly change American culture. You know, you can't, but you can go there and be, you know, a man of honor down there in the way you vote, and the way you legislate, and the way you are in your community, because you're a community leader, to help do your part, so to speak.
Lee, you'd mentioned something you could do as a state legislature to change some of that stuff. When they shut down the Northern Illinois Women's Clinic in Rockford, it came out that the Illinois Department of Health hadn't inspected them in something like 14 years.
Yeah.
As a state legislature, you can get these places inspected more often, couldn't you?
That ties right into meeting hospital standards, because almost across the board, one of the things they found, not just in Illinois, but other states, is that some of these clinics run into problems, exactly what you're talking about. The clinic I mentioned earlier, I forget if it's Ohio or Indiana, same problem, they hadn't investigated in a long time. Obviously, if they have that stuff stacked in the walls, clearly nobody has been in there in a long time to regulate them. And that ties back into meeting basic hospital standards, meeting basic medical standards. It's a common sense issue to me, really. It really is. I don't think anybody from any persuasion should have any issue with that kind of bill. It really, I can't believe it failed. It seems so common sense to me. Yeah, go in and check them out. As a restaurant, I get investigated more often than that. A minimum of a couple times a year. A minimum. As a restaurant. So a place doing medical invasive procedures going longer, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I was going to say, at my work, we have state, I believe federal, and industry inspectors in almost monthly. And it said these guys, 14 years.
Again, like I said, good lobbyists. It's a money industry. It's all cash, like you were mentioning. They have an incentive to try to keep people away. And if they're not people down there nosing around like I will be, trying to figure out what's wrong there, they're just going to look the other way. And some of them are good people, just didn't even know it was a problem. You have to think there's a lot of people down in Springfield that just didn't realize it was that big of a problem. Because the idea that all of them would knowingly turn their eyes away from that is kind of shocking. So hopefully it's just a little bit of negligence as opposed to intent, which I'm sure for some of them it is that they know. But yeah, that's, like I said, there are things state legislatures can do. Whenever you get into issues like, you know, the pro-life issues, people always talk about Roe v. Wade, these big federal issues. That's true. They have more authority at that level, but there are definitely things state legislatures, you know, such as myself, if I won, that we can do to help fight that fight and try to protect innocent life. So that would definitely be a part of my platform. It is a part of my platform. I got it in a lot of panels. All right, any other issues, comments, questions?
All right, I guess I'll got one more then.
Hit me with another.
Okay, a couple of days ago, a couple of state legislatures introduced a bill that would make Chicago and Cook County a 51st state.
Yes.
In order to correct a lot of the problems that the Chicago, Cook County Democratic Party machine causes for the rest of the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I read about that.
I personally see that as not the way to go. I have thought of actually amending the state constitution so that our statewide elected offices would be based on an electoral college style system like the President of the United States is, where each county in Illinois would get one vote towards electing the statewide office, and the person who got the majority of the counties would be our governor, for example.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think Chicago is definitely an issue that has to be addressed in terms of how their systems there are completely different. Even the way they elect their precinct committeemen are different. Because in Chicago, they're all appointed, if I remember right. In every other county, in Cook County, they're all appointed, and everywhere else, precinct committeemen are elected. So even down to the little things like that, they get a different set of rules than the rest of Illinois. And to some degree, you expect a little bit of that because it's a big city, different, you know, they're going to have their own rules as Chicago. But some of it is kind of ridiculous, especially when they start imposing their ideas on the rest of the state, which is what I think the root issue is, with people trying to split with Chicago. But you hear that debate a lot when they talk about gun rights. When you talk about concealed carry, it's typically Chicago legislators that are blocking that. Even the Democrats from down south, every one of them vote for concealed carry. It has more than a majority to pass, but due to the way the Constitution is written, it violates home rule. It violates the home rule, so it takes a supermajority, and Chicago legislators keep blocking it. so the whole rest of the state is kind of having to follow Chicago's stance on it.
And I might vote for Chicago nurse.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you that it's probably not a legitimate solution. I don't think it's going to happen, and if it did, the logistics of it would be mind-boggling. I think
Yeah, but then maybe Republican could actually take over the state.
a Republican would take over the state if it allowed
It might not
Chicago.
be so bad.
Like I said, that's why I kind of proposed the electoral college style change, so that it wouldn't, the statewide elections wouldn't be based on who got the majority in Chicago. It would be based on who got the majority of every county in the state.
Right. And the biggest problem you're going to run into there, just to be practical, is you're going to have a lot of people talk about the concept of one person, one vote, and how that would violate it. And that would be a problem you'd have to address with that. So, one person, one vote, it's a very strong concept, equal representation under the law. And the problem is Chicago just keeps up taking more and more of the population, and they kind of have them enthralled there. The unions are very powerful there. To get a job sometimes you pretty much have to go in and vote a straight ticket of who they're telling you to vote for.
I was just going to say that one person, one vote is not what
Right. So it's definitely
One vote comes in,
being
they tell you who
abused.
to vote for. So it's like one person, 20 votes,
Yeah.
you know, because their carload all votes
Yeah.
the way they tell them to.
And it's kind of
Yeah,
like
the dads still vote in
incumbency,
Chicago,
the power,
too.
The power of incumbency is
Yeah.
another thing that kind of curbs the power of democracy. People, well, we want to be able to elect who we want. Well, incumbency gives you a lot of advantages you don't get otherwise in terms of money and support and everything else. So it's nice to say we're electing who we want, but at the same time, if you have the power to quash anybody running against you before the people even get a legitimate chance to vote on them, it's not really a fair shot. And that's one of the powerful things about an open seat, like we're having right now in the race I'm running in. A lot of times, when was the last time you saw 5 people, now 4 people, running for it, hearing all their ideas, having them come out and talk to you? For the most part, once you get in a seat, you can just be comfortable. You don't have to come to town halls. You just have to go get money from the people who have it, put a bunch of ads on there, and you're going to have so much name ID, nobody else is going to have a shot. But what gets hurt is the democracy, the ability to talk about ideas, and actually, as a representative, representing people and hearing what they have to say. You have to hunt them down at their offices and then hope they're there. So, and hopefully if I get in, that's not something I will ever become. I will continue to do town halls. You still see legislators to do that, and I will be one of them. I will continue to do town halls even if I get elected. I'll continue to come out into the community as opposed to making everybody come to my office.
Can we get that in writing?
You can. I will put that in writing. I will sign it down. I don't plan on going career. I've already publicly said I'm going to refuse my pension if I get elected. One of the things I've been talking about is how we address the pension system. I think it would be a conflict of interest if I accepted a nice, fat legislature's pension and I said, hey, we're going to cut everybody else's. Not that I'm saying I'll cut everybody else's, but I'm not going there to be a career. I'm not going to be there for 20 years. And if I am there for any length of time, I want it to be because I still have a passion to serve, not because I'm trying to fully vest my pension. So I'm not going to accept a public pension. My retirement is my business, and that gives me more incentive to make sure Illinois' business climate is good instead of making sure my pension is fully vested in the legislature. So I think that's an issue that I think when I tell this to people that I'm going for that reason, you can see I'm willing to just not say it, but actually do something about it, because that's a legislator's pension in Illinois is probably over the course of a retirement well into the 6 figures. And I'm willingly giving it up because I believe in a citizen representative, a citizen legislator that's representing people, not as a power of incumbency to ignore them, which is one of the things.
It's one thing when they get a pension from their legislative pension.
Right.
But what they do is they put themselves on different boards where they get
Right.
they get more money from every one of them.
Right.
So,
The double dipping. The double dipping.
Yeah,
you're
they're
talking
double
about, right?
dipping, but I don't know what
Yeah.
the exact salary is for them. Say $60,000, $70,000. But they get themselves put on these different boards, and then they're getting $100,000.
Yep, absolutely.
$150,000.
And I'm not coming to jam down anybody's throat.
Correct
I've
me
been
if I'm wrong,
called.
but isn't that supposed to be a part-time job?
Well, it is. It is supposed to be a part-time job, and I'm not going around saying anybody else should do it. I'm not calling on any of my opponents to do it. It's just a choice I'm making because I'm going to represent the people. That's my background. I'm not going to go seek big names and get their endorsements. I'm not going to go seek a whole bunch of money and try to just blink to the TV. I'm going to go for people and earn their votes the hard way, and then I'm going to go represent them. And I don't plan on going for 20 years, so I don't care about a fully vested pension. And in order to prove that, this is one of the things I decided to do. And I think it helps me prevent a conflict of interest anyway, because like I said, the pension issues are going to keep coming up. For whoever wins this, the pension issue is our longest, biggest issue in terms of structural debt that we're going to have to deal with.
There's
And,
real simple solutions to that pension
right,
problem.
yeah. So it just removes right there, so no conflict of interest. When I go, I'm going to go research the issues, research the pensions, try to make sure we're protecting the people who earned it and spent a lifetime with civil servants, but also reforming the system so it can't be abused. And I'm not going to have my own pension kind of around my back to worry about as a conflict of interest. So problem solved. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do it. So, anyway. Any other questions? Kept
Do you
you.
know anybody else that you can bring with you? That believes the way you do?
Well, I think, man, that kind of frustrated me in the last cycle. Because I remember I mentioned I was volunteering with Randy Halgren, and we had this wave at the federal level. We took more seats. The Republicans and the Conservatives in Illinois were gunning to flip 4 seats, and we flipped 5, which tells you how much of a wave there was for change in the country. But what happened at the state level? We lost the governor's race. We didn't take back the state house. We didn't take back the state senate. Exactly. And I think this cycle is a little bit different. A lot of people were paying attention at the federal level and now also paying attention at the state level, realizing that what the state legislature does affects them immensely. And you've seen it at the county level too. I mean, the wind farms are a great example. Everybody's paying attention to them. And people say, oh, it's so contentious, but I say, no, great. People are paying attention. That's what they're supposed to be doing. If you really want to be a government of the people and by the people and for the people, then the people need to pay attention. Otherwise, people are going to take that power from them. If you're asleep, there's plenty of other people who gladly drive the wheel and spend your money for you. And I think what we're seeing is more people are taking time